Good morning, students. Today we start with another novel. Hope you have the copy of this novel. This is If on a Winter's Night a Traveler by Italo Calvino. So, in this class, I'll be giving a summary of the novel, and then later we will move to the themes and meanings, and you will have a critical analysis of this work. But I want you to read this novel because it is a little bit complicated one. You need to have an idea of how is it proceeding. So let me start with Italo Calvino. Italo Calvino is an Italian novelist and intellectual, was born in 1923 and died in 1985. And he is famous for his trilogy, Our Ancestors, and for having written Invisible Cities, which came out in 1972. And also, he was a great literary theoretician. Sometimes he was referred to as a modernist writer, and he explored different genres of literature. And it is not so easy to sort him to a kind of a simple or a vague category as a modernist writer because he has explored different genres and he used this medium for different experiments, as you see in this particular work. And as you see in this work, he is exploring all those possibilities of literature, which at this, in a sense, go to an extreme in this work, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. And to quote what he has declared about the book during a conference in 1984, he tells, "This is a novel treating of the pleasure of reading novels. The hero is the reader, who begins 10 times to read a book which he can't finish because of circumstances external to his will. Thus, I have had to write 10 novels from imaginary authors, each in a way different from me and all different between themselves. A novel entirely made of suspicions and confused feelings. Another based on incarnated and sanguine sensations. An introspective and symbolic novel. Another revolutionary and existential, another cynical and brutal, another yet ruled by obsessing idiosyncrasies, another logical and geometrical, another erotical and perverse, another telluric and primordial, a last one apocalyptic and allegorical. Rather than identifying myself with the author of each of these 10 novels, I have tried to identify myself with the reader, to figure the reading pleasure of this or that genre rather than the text, properly speaking. But most of all, I have tried to bring forward the fact that each book is begotten in the presence of other books and in relation and by opposition to other books. So, what can we derive from that? As I said earlier, why is this book a must read in English fictions, of all English fictions? So, he's trying out 10 different genres and he's melting them all into one single novel rather than he could have published in as a some kind of a short story collection. But what Calvino does is that he puts them all in presence of each other as he says, in relation and in opposition. So he's trying to develop a reflection on literature in general. So let me start with the summary of this novel. As I said earlier, please read the novel. Otherwise, it will be very confusing to understand the novel as such. So we'll move to the summary. This novel, as I said earlier, it is not an easy read. Definitely not a quick read book, quick read novel. It is considered as a European work. What is this European work? Europol is the acronym of Workshop of Potential Literature, which was founded on November 24th, 1916, France, as a subcommittee of another group. And this group of writers and mathematicians sought to create works using constrained techniques such as repetition, switching every noun in a story with another noun, and writing without using a specific letter of the alphabet. So it looks like a game. And in If on a Winter's Night at Travel, as the title indicates, there is a play of words. There is this different techniques used in the title itself. So, in this work, Calvino uses the constraint of repetitive experiences slightly differently. As you see, all the odd number chapters, like 1, 3, 5, 7 chapters, are told in the second person and tell the reader what is happening in preparation for the next chapter. And all the even numbered chapters are actually the chapters of the books that the protagonist is trying to read. So it is as simple as that. It is as complicated as that, I should say. So all odd numbered chapters are told in second person, and it is actually making the reader prepare for the real story. And all the even numbered chapters are the chapters which the protagonist is trying to read. So that is why it is known as a European work. And the summary, the narrative of this work is divided among alternating chapters, as I said earlier, that follow the story of the reader who is expressed as second person you. And interspersed chapters each present a separate embedded narrative. There is an embedded narrative in these chapters. That is the start of another book that the reader encounters on his search for the remainder of the book he first began. So it contains a separate embedded narrative in which there is something like start of another book. So within this book there is another book which the reader encounters when he is going on a search for the remainder of the book. And at the end of chapter 1, which actually reflects on the types and practice of reading, the reader settles with this book, settles into reading Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, and he finds that the book does not progress beyond the first chapter, because of a printer's error. And chapter 2 picks up where the reading is interrupted for the first time after the first chapter. So begins this reader's search for the rest of the book, which persists which persists for the remainder of the novel and brings him to contact with various characters and partial text. And the first notable character he encounters in the bookstore to which he has gone to exchange his faulty book. So he finds that his book he wants to read, it is not the book he really wants to read. So he finds that he decides to give it back to the bookstore, and he goes to this bookstore. And here he encounters with another reader, Ludmilla, one of the important character, Ludmilla Vipiteno. And here he also encounters his first false lead, as he is told that the book he is reading is not actually Calvino's If on a Winter's Night a Traveler, but Tasio Basak Bells outside the town of Melbourne. So the book is completely different. And just as the reader settles into this particular novel outside the town of Melbourne, his reading is again interrupted. This time by a large section of uncut blank pages. So he sees all blank pages in this novel. And in chapter 3, we see that the frustrated reader tries to contact Ludmilla to see whether her replacement copy has the same problem. And instead, the reader speaks only with Ludmilla's sister, Loteria, another important character. So she is also a critical reader, and her friend Irnerio, a non reader. And Loteria leads the reader to Professor Uzi Tuzi, who explains that outside the town of Melbourne is really Uko Akis, Uko Aktis, leaning from the steep slope. So the reader started reading, intended to read If on a Winter's Night a Travel, and later he understood that he got outside the town of Melbourne. And when he talks to Loteria, he understands that Loteria takes to this Uzi Tusi, and he explains that it is actually another book. Outside the town of Melbourne is really leaning from the steep slope. And this Uzi Tusi begins to read his copy aloud, translating as he goes along. And the reading experience is again interrupted, and chapter 4 begins with Ludmilla's entrance just as the text of Leaning from the Steep Slope breaks off. Loteria enters shortly thereafter with her readers group and claims that the novel is not in fact leaning from the steep slope but is instead Without Fear of Wind or Vertigo by Woods Viljandi. So it may be possibly Uko Akti's pseudonym. And then this group begins to start reading Without Fear of Wind or Vertigo. So he started with If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Then he understood that the book is outside the town of Well, book. Later he understood that that is really not the book, it is leaning from the steep slope. And later he understand that it is not even that book, it is Without Fear of Wind or Vertigo. And this group starts reading this work. And this group reading ends when, at the start of chapter 5, Loteria throws wide open a critical discussion of the text. And we see the reader's outcry on, they give a kind of a parody and critical parody, academic and critical responses to literature. And at the end, we see these readers get fed up, and he travels to the publishing house to try to sort out the confusion, and he wants to encounter the editor, who is Mr. Cave Dagner. And this curious character, Mr. Cave Dagner, explains that the true source of the confusion is actually a translator named Hermes Marana, who has forged this Without Fear of Wind or Vertigo from another Belgian author, which is a work titled French Text Looks Down in the Gathering Shadows. And after discovering that the look down in the gathering shadows is not the text the reader is after, in chapter 6, we see that reader obtains from Mr. Cave Dagner a copy of Hermes Marana's dossier. And the reader learns that Marana is a consultant for the Organization for the Electronic Production of Homogenized Literary Works, through which he has produced a book of beginnings to accommodate the Sultana's insatiable desire to read. And the reader wonders whether the Sultana is really Ludmilla, as he understands there are some similarities which is very difficult to ignore. And also in the dossier, he sees there is this start of yet another book in a network of lines that enlace, which the reader flips through while waiting to meet with Ludmilla to learn more. And in chapter 7, the reader arrives at Ludmilla's apartment to find not Ludmilla there but Irnerio, who is visiting. And after entertaining considerations on the nature of literacy and function of books, during which the reader learns that Ludmilla and Marana are well acquainted, and the narrative shifts perspective to regard more closely to the other reader, Ludmilla. And after Irnerio leaves, the reader and the other reader, Ludmilla, engage in a sexual tryst, and then they have an argument, after which the reader begins reading another of Marana's forgeries in a network of lines that intersect. The reader later visits Silas Flannery, who is the author of In a Network of Lines That Intersect. And the text of chapter 8 comes from Flannery's diary, in which he muses over the young woman he sees reading every morning. And this leads him to reflect on different forms of reading, especially of Lothario and Ludmilla. And the reader's copy of In a Network of lines that intersect. It is stolen by a group of fanatics, and Flannery gives the reader a copy of Takakumi Ikoka's On the Carpet of Leaves, illuminated by the moon, telling the reader that this is really his story's source, though we understand that this claim is false. And from there on, the plot takes unusual turns, as you see in chapter 9, as the reader continues to pursue the lost fragments of his original books. And here he encounters Lothario, who he now learns that he is acting as a double agent for both revolution and counter revolution in a place named Atagitania. And in a land of banned books and false identities, no leads can be trusted. And after Corina, another one, confiscates the reader's copy of On the Carpet of Leaves, she replaces it with another, that is Calixto Banderas, Around an Empty Grave. And in Atagitania, these books can circulate only with false dust jackets. And in chapter 10, the reader finds that he has joined the counter revolution and he is now himself working as a double agent. And in a secret meeting with author Anatolina, the reader receives a copy of this banned text. What story down there awaits its end? Which he is told is a version of Banderas Around an Empty Grave. However, we find that he is no closer to reaching his goal of finding, still, if Onaminder's knighted traveler, and he comes to realize the futility of his search. And the reader finally gives up his long quest and returns in chapter 11 to his hometown and goes to the library and tries to retrieve the copies of each of these 10 books he has encountered so far. And in the library, he encounters 8 other readers who expound on the theories of this reading experience and prompt the reader to write down a list of the titles for which he is searching. And he notes that all these stories begin with a traveler and address the cycle of life and death. And in chapter 12, the reader and the other reader are married. This reader finally reaches the conclusion that if Fonaminder's knighted traveler, just as it is time to turn out the lights and go to bed. So, this is the summary of the novel If Fonaminder's Knighted Traveler. So, I know that this is very complicated. That is why I suggested to read the novel so that you will get to know the real taste of this process of reading. So I'm stopping here with this summary. We will move to the themes and meanings and critical analysis in the next class. And please familiarize yourself with this novel so that you can have a better understanding of these lectures. Thank you, girls. Have a nice day.